What is something that once you noticed it, you can now no longer unnotice it? Mickey Mouse's ears are, by design, always facing the camera. If you watch almost any Disney show with Mickey in it, his ears will migrate around the silhouette of his head. In certain instances his ears will even switch sides. I believe at one point they did make cartoons where his ears moved correctly, but it was either easier not to or just not well received, so they went back to the original way. When you're a welder you notice how shooty most welds are that hold crucial components together. Ex-weld inspector here. Yeah, so, right, and it scares the shoot out of me. Actors glancing down for their mark. Once you're aware, you look for it in every scene. It's most easily spotted in sitcoms. This reminds me of season 1 Fresh Prince. Apparently Will had a habit of mouthing other people's lines in scenes, and I can't unsee it now. He does it in the episode with Don Cheadle as the character's name, lol. How humans naturally break eye contact when talking to each other. Every 3 seconds, they glance away. Now every time I talk to someone, I notice them glancing away. Supposedly it's a way to communicate in a non-threatening manner as staring equals intent, either sexual or violent. I know a lot of common sounds will always sound very similar, but once you've watched enough movies you will notice that most films use the same sound effects for their films. Cars braking hard, people gasping, guns being racked. All of these films use the exact same sound effects for some reason. Vet Tech here. I recently realized that one of Grey's Anatomy's background noises is the noise a fluid pump makes when it needs to be reset. It is a noise I'm very familiar with, and one that grates on my nerves. Empty cups. I don't know why most shows and movies can't be bothered to put a liquid of any sort into coffee cups for scenes. You can tell when someone is holding a cup with something in it, or just acting like it, and fake sips never come out well. Sometimes you can literally see the emptiness. IDK, but you ever get a car and then notice you start seeing that car everywhere? This is caused by the simulation not having enough memory to store all the different vehicles, so you end up with some duplication and start seeing banshees everywhere once you get one. How often people interrupt each other during a conversation. I grew up with 5 siblings in a rather loud household. You sort of had to interrupt in order to be heard at all. I noticed this in my latest reunion with my siblings. There's sort of an art to pinpointing when someone's are almost done talking. When the important words are already said, you just trample over the end of their sentence and say your addition to the conversation. We're all used to it by now. It doesn't bother us. It keeps the conversation fast-paced and lively, but in my current relationship I had to realize that it's super rude if the other person isn't used to it. I had to retrain my brain to be more patient. I saw this happen in my sister's relationship to ex-DRS. Oh, gets pretty frustrated when she interrupts him. Tom Cruise's front tooth. That dude's entire face was like, what if we have really good symmetry, but not the way you're thinking?
N.
A sign maker for a local Chinese restaurant made an error when creating the lighted sign for the business. It reads, "We delivery" instead of "free delivery." They let the Chinese restaurant have the sign for free if they accepted it as is. I'd never noticed the "we delivery" until it was pointed out. Singers breathing in music. So many breaths. Mona Lisa looks like George Washington. Sleep apps with white noise have a repeat on them. I can't use them because my mind latches onto the repeat and keeps me up. I'm sorry in advance. McCullough effect. The phenomenon was discovered by cellist McCullough in 1965. McCullough found that staring at colorful gratings for too long can affect vision for months to come. Turns out, looking at these gratings for more than 10 minutes can have the effect last over 3 months. I tried it, and it lasted about a week or 2 whenever I looked at anything resembling bars such as a fence. A bunch of Led Zeppelin songs, like Since I've Been Loving You, Houses of the Holy, and All My Love have a squeaky bass drum pedal. Apparently, the bass pedal John Bonham used was called the Ludwig Speed King, and there was no way to oil the inner mechanisms. Bad green screen in movies totally breaks immersion. Driving scenes are the worst for this, especially in older movies/shows. Doesn't help that the driver spends the scene slightly wiggling the steering wheel, while spending maybe 1 cumulative second actually looking at the road. My wife pointed out that sometimes makeup artists will draw lipstick outside the lips to make the lips bigger, different shapes, etc. I freaking see it everywhere now. Every time you swallow, your ears click. God damn it. Just swallowed 3 times in a row to make sure hope I forget this. Characters in movies will never explain the plan if it's going to succeed. They'll just show it hap. I'm a nurse. I can't help but look at people's veins to assess where I'd place the 4th. Lol. I wonder if I've ever met you, or if this is somewhat common. I'm very a pale white girl. My veins are super noticeable. I hate it. I've had a handful of people mention I have good veins. What's worse is that sometimes the person saying is definitely not a nurse. People's verbal tics. Once I noticed someone uses a word or sound without noticing, like or uhh. I have trouble focusing on anything else. For example, I have a coworker that uses alright as a filler word, and I don't think he realizes how often he says it. Alright, we ran the test, and, alright, once we pulled up the data, alright, we found that such and such didn't read like we expected, alright, so we pulled up the first time we ran this test, alright, and what we saw that time, alright, was... I've gotten to the point that I just count his alrights instead of actually listening to him. My students do this. I started clicking my pen every time they said Surprisingly, even without knowing why I was doing the pen click, they stop pretty quickly. Plus, it's better than counting. When I went to university, when I was younger, I had to take a design class. I was in university for web development, so this seemed related. I was immediately turned off from the class because it had nothing directly related to web design, but was just a class on design principles. I grew to cherish the lessons I had learned, and it made me realize how poorly designed most consumer shit truly is. Sit in a vehicle, but it's hard to see out the back window? Shit design. Buy a blender and want to clean it, only to find it awful and difficult. Shit design. Want to log into your government's website and change your settings, but it only works in IE8. Shit design. You get the point. Anytime in life you notice something or some product acting as a hindrance to you is shit design. Remove these products from your life as soon as possible and do your best to not reward these companies with your money. Breaking Bad's camera just shaking the whole time. I had a friend that couldn't ever watch Boston Legal because every scene just started with a wide shot that zoomed in extremely slowly until the end of the scene. Once he pointed it out, I couldn't watch either. The eye vibration. Whenever actors want to seem super emotional and intense, they kind of vibrate their eyes back and forth really quickly. No one knows what I'm talking about, but I swear it's true. When you watch a film at the cinema, even though most are digital transmissions, they still have the odd white fleck you sometimes notice. This is a watermark that uniquely identifies that film being played. So if it is pirated and put on the web, then the film companies know exactly which cinema it was played in. In movies and TV, nobody ever says bye at the end of a phone call. I saw someone on here use the quote from Taken a while ago to show how it doesn't always work. I don't know who you are. I don't know what you want. If you are looking for ransom, I can tell you I don't have money. But what I do have are a very particular set of skills. Skills I have acquired over a very long career. Skills that make me a nightmare for people like you. If you let my daughter go now, that'll be the end of it. I will not look for you. I will not pursue you. But if you don't, I will look for you. I will find you. And I will kill you. Goodbye. Homeowana has the word meow in it. The fact that there is a D in fridge, but not in refrigerator. Cars have faces. Ever notice how all stars seem to have the same spiky shape regardless of their size? I notice it whenever I look up at the night sky now. The shape you see is completely unique to your eye's own geography, how the small lines on them smear the light, so they will all look slightly different to each person. That's also why, when you are looking at telescopic pictures of stars, you can sometimes tell what kind of aperture they use to take the pictures. For example, Hubble telescope pictures usually have fairly distinctive 4-point stars. The Laura's American accent on House MD. If I had to describe it, it's like him doing an American accent without an actual American accent. Everywhere in the US, people have accents. Even the people who don't think they have one. They just don't hear it because they've been around it their entire lives. So his delivery is just a flat intonation of what a non-American would probably think we all sound like. And it works. He's a great actor. It's just once I noticed it in the show I couldn't forget it. Me realizing my hair was thinning made me look at every other man's hair to see if they are a future baldy like myself. TV, movies, pictures, out in public. It's inescapable. My eyes always find a way to look at a man's forehead and determine if his hair's gonna make it or not. The constant din of shopping cartwheels when you are at the grocery store. It's all I can hear now. And the beeping of the scanners at the cash register. I couldn't stand working there a full shift having to hear that constantly. The arrow and the FedEx logo. The arrow and the Amazon logo goes from A to Z. Stripper poles are rigged to rotate on bearings. When a stripper elegantly runs up to a pole and spins around it, the pole is rotating. If it didn't, strippers would get the worst chafing. No worries, sliding down still chafes, especially if you're just starting out. Also, not all poles rotate. In competitive pole sports, the stage will have 2 poles, one static, one spinning. I never paid attention to other drivers on the road before I started driving a truck. When you sit high above the traffic, it's like having a magnifying glass on other drivers. The stuff that takes place on the road is unbelievable. It's impossible to unnotice it. I'm obese, and I feel my weight. It's a good thing. I feel absurdly heavy. My back hurts. Moving my torso takes a ton of work. My stomach is problematic, and my center of gravity is way too high. Once I felt it, I felt motivated to lose that feeling. A person with very big muscles looks like a small person in a big meat suit. The neck / start of shoulder muscles look like their shoulders, packed in a bigger muscle suit. Head also looks slightly too small oft. I think you may have just answered the lifelong question I've had about why I don't find really ripped men attractive like so many people I know. My friends would drool over them, and it'd just be slightly unsettled and instead drool over the lanky yeah right. Totally looks like a suit. I never pinpointed what bothered me about bodybuilders. Whoa. Unlike a mild case of tinnitus, the kind that you forget about until jerks like me remind you. Like losing the game. I've had this for years without realizing it. The weird thing is I never saw it as a bad thing until I learned what tinnitus is. For a good while after that I always noticed the ringing, and it was annoying. But once I ignored it again, things went back to normal. So now I don't look at it as a bad thing. I see it as the sound my brain makes when it's awake. Kind of like that high-pitched sound older TVs used to make when you turned them on. It makes dealing with it a whole lot easier. In one of my favorite films, Braveheart, at the first war scene, when the Scots pretty much had the battle won, there's a moment where way in the background you could see just a few men still fighting, and 2 of them were just doing it sarcastically, like they were goofing around. I finally noticed it after years of having seen the film multiple times. It kind of ruined the movie for me a bit, because that part really takes away the suspension of disbelief and makes it all feel so dumb. I have never been able to not notice it or unsee it since. A few years ago I was walking down the hall with a friend of mine, and he was looking at me weird and eventually said, "Oh, you're not limping, you just have a shorter step with your right foot." Since then I can't not notice it. Worse still, I've now also noticed that foot tends to point out. My head is always a little tilted, and my body in general has a weird twist to it. Thanks, buddy. The laugh track in The Big Bang Theory. My brain had successfully ignored it for years, and I liked the show. Then I told a friend I liked it, and he was yeah, but the background laughs are so over the top and constant I can't stand it. Bam. Couldn't stand 5 minutes of the show ever since. In Gym Shelter by the Rolling Stones during Mary Clayton's solo part her voice cracks a little during the second refrain, then cracks a lot in the following one, immediately after which you can hear Mick Jagger shouting, "Woo" in the background. It's like 3 minutes into the song I think. Now I can't not hear the woo. There's an advertisement after every fourth Facebook post. In the Star Trek TNG opening sequence, when the camera pans from the big red planet with the rings, the stars between the rings and the planet are really different than the stars outside of the rings. I'm currently rewatching the series, and it is really sticking out to me this time. Also, every time someone especially Pickard stands up, they have to readjust their uniform. I used to never pay much attention to framed shoot hanging on walls. After working in an art framing shop, I can't help noticing all the horrible and tacky framing jobs that are hanging around in the world. Probably the most common and most irritating to me is things being hung in humid environments like bathrooms, when they clearly weren't sealed up around the edges, so they wouldn't get destroyed. 1. I once read that children can easily see the arrow in the FedEx logo up until the point that they develop language. I never knew it was there but now can't unsee it. Luckily, this hasn't seemed to diminish my language skills. 2. I didn't know that the ABC song and Twinkle Twinkle Little Star was the same melody until I sang them to my first child over 100 times. A very simple, obvious and basic one is film cuts, specifically cuts that are there probably because they are covering something up. Like, sure, we all notice scene breaks and back and forth dialogue stuff, but there are so many cuts that we just sort of filter out or don't register. But, a bit like breathing or blinking, if you watch something and actively keep track of the cuts, you'll likely be surprised how many there are that you don't notice. And once you start thinking more about cuts, you may start to notice that some cuts aren't like others, and then you start to notice stuff that was patched in or interpolated to fix something. In the majority of popular music, most of the time the singer will say "you" instead of "you," as in "I want you." My co-worker says "on accident" instead of "by accident," and once I noticed, I cannot unhear it. Nice guy, but every time he says it, it makes me shudder.